Hello and welcome to another episode of Voice of Supply Chain. This is a show we have been hosting now for over 4 years, so we continue to bring on awesome guests. The purpose of our show is to tell personal stories about people in procurement and supply chain doing extraordinary things. I am your show host, Sarah Scudder. I am a fractional CMO doing work with multiple procure tech brands. And I'm kind of a supply chain geek. I love our industry. I love talking about all the change and things happening in our space. And I am delighted to have our guest on the show today, Susan Patrick Harris. We actually got to spend some time together in Atlanta at the Procurement Foundry conference at the end of last year. And one of the things that really stood out to me about Susan is she is such a positive, bright light, and she has just this incredible energy about her. And after spending a few days with her, I decided that she would be a really, really good fit to come on the show and share her personal story about how she has absolutely crushed it and has become an SVP. So with that, we are going to kick off our interview. For those of you that are with us live, I would ask you to drop a note in the comments and tell us where in the world you are joining us from. And then something that is top of mind for you today in regards to procurement or supply chain, drop that in the comments as well. And as always, if you have any questions for our guest, Susan, today, drop those in the comments and I will do my very best to make sure we get to those as well. So Susan, I like to kick off all of our interviews by going way back in time, talking about childhood years, because I think a lot that happens in our childhood actually shapes the people that we are personally and professionally. So with that, I would like to have you start by sharing a favorite childhood memory.
Absolutely. First, Sarah, thank you so much. This is so much fun. And I was so tickled when I got your email because it was lovely to meet you also. I feel like we've been friends on LinkedIn for years. And so it was fun to finally meet your face and get to know you in person. So yeah, childhood memory, gosh. So I'm a Detroiter by birth. And I think some of my earliest, most fun childhood memories were spent in the swimming pool. So we were one of those fabulous Midwestern homes that, as soon as the weather got nice, we would hit the pool. And so we had this great big above ground backyard pool. And my dad built this amazing deck around it. And then he was an engineer. And so we actually constructed this amazing Candyland type playhouse that was huge off the deck. And so you could kind of go play in the playhouse or go get in the pool. And I just remember our house always being the house that all the kids were at. There was always lots of activity, people in and out of the pool, people in the backyard. And I loved that spirit of community. We lived on a court. And so you knew everybody kind of in the community. And we were just kind of always spending the time together and supporting one another from a very local community perspective. And it was awesome.
So I grew up in Chico, California. A lot of people may not be super familiar. Chico State is kind of a reputation of being the party school or party campus. And we also grew up with the pool. You kind of can't survive living in Chico if you don't have a swimming pool. It is like crazy hot, no humidity, but it is super hot. So I also can relate. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and we basically grew up in the swimming pool.
Yes.
And about 4 or 5 months out of the year, we literally lived in the pool.
Yes.
Like my parents could not get us out at night.
Yes. My mother would say, take your swimsuit off. I see it under your pajamas. Get that swimsuit off your body. I was like, I want to be ready for the morning, right? Because it was just always so much fun. So I feel you.
So we have lots of people from all over. So I just want to give a couple of shout outs. We've got John joining us from Jacksonville, Florida, James from Buffalo, New York, David from Las Vegas. David, I will be in Vegas in a couple of weeks attending the ISM conference. So hope to see you there. We've got Dr. Cindy from Nashville, Tennessee, Josiah from Tennessee, Michael from Houston, Texas, Dennis from Rochester, New York. So we've got a fair amount of New Yorkers and East Coasters joining us today. And Susan, I have to also call out, you mentioned you are a Lions fan. Love the photo that I posted of you promoting the show, rocking your Lions jacket.
Yes.
I am a 49er fan through and true. Not a huge rival, but I can't say that I support the Lions.
That's
But I
fun.
loved that you were repping your team as you were traveling and in the airport waiting for your luggage.
Indeed. You know, I was a Lions fan before it was cool to be a Lions fan. And so I feel like I've earned my stripes. So yes, I wear my gear everywhere.
Weirdest, so childhood memory, you spent a lot of time in the pool. You guys were the kind of fun social house.
Mhm.
Weirdest thing you did as a kid?
Yeah, I was a super boring kid. I've always been a pretty serious person. And so I was the kid that was always like, "Oh, mom, can I, help you make dinner?" Or, "What's the next chore that needs to happen in the house?" So if we weren't in the pool, I was pretty boring. I like to read a book and kind of be left alone. I'm also one of four girls. And so those moments where we weren't at school and weren't in the swimming pool, I would do a lot of chillaxing by myself in my room, listening to music, and just very much a rule follower, never really getting in trouble. Pretty boring.
So you are one of four as well. What number in line are you? I was the
Number two,
oldest. Oh, you're the
second
second.
oldest.
Okay.
Yes.
So the parents were really strict on the oldest sibling and were a
Yes.
little bit easier on you.
Little bit. Yeah. And by the time the youngest came, through, it was like
But
there
it's
were no.
anything goes. My youngest
Yes.
sister could do whatever she wanted.
Yes.
What in your childhood would you say really stands out that the thing that shaped you to be the person that you are today?
Yeah, again, super nerdy answer, but it was being in band. I was never a great musician, but I was a great leader in the band. And so I'm very fortunate that the public schools that I went to always had very good music programs. So was able to start, playing an instrument in the 7th grade. And by the time I got to high school, I was in a very good section, had a, great band director, and really worked hard at my craft. Was able to do concert band, jazz band, marching band, and really started loving leadership through the band program at the school. And so I was able to be the band president when I was a senior in high school, and I loved it. I loved being able to work with my peers. And it was a big group. It was about 100, over 125 kids, to help foster the things like the fundraisers and the field trips and all of the stuff that you've got to do to get to competitions. I think that's really where my love of leadership was born, was really going through those motions in high school, because band's unique where you're with all the same kids, for multiple years. And so those relationships get very deep. And then I wound up marrying a kid I went to high school with. We were both in band together. And so now all our friends are band friends. And so it is very funny just kind of how it worked.
So is it fair to say you are a real life childhood sweetheart couple? High school
So
sweetheart couple?
that's funny. If my husband was on here, he would say yes, and I will say no every time. We did not date in high school, but he firmly states that we did. It's very funny. We were friends all through school, and we're always in big groups together. We stood in the same weddings. We were often paired together in those weddings, but never dated in high school. Dated much later in life. Like I said, his version of the story is that we did date a few times in high school and did some functions and went to movies and things. But it's funny how our version of what happened is just a little bit different from high school.
So you are a band couple.
We are a band couple. And now my oldest son, who's in middle school, has decided to be in band. And I mean, mom and dad couldn't be any happier. We are so thrilled that maybe one of our children will stay with the music. So that's very fun.
We've got Michelle joining us from North Carolina, Sandra joining us from Kansas City, and we have Heather joining us from Washington. So thanks to all of you who are tuned in live today. Feel free to also drop us a note and share what topic is top of mind for you today or this week as it relates to supply chain and procurement, something that's just really on your mind. I may bring it up to Susan and have her share an opinion or perspective. Susan, most influential person in your childhood and why?
Yeah, I would say my folks, right? My mom and dad really, for totally different reasons. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was very devoted to, our education and making sure that we had what we needed and being our emotional support. My dad was this amazing guy who went to work every day and just crushed it and traveled internationally and was very well known and very well respected in his career. And so I feel very lucky and blessed that I was able to kind of get the best of both worlds from a support function. And so, really, yeah, both my folks were just awesome.
What's one tradition? And the reason I ask this question is like you, I also grew up, I would consider being one of four. Four siblings is kind of a big family.
Yeah.
One tradition that you've continued on with your own family today
Mhm.
that you picked up from childhood.
Yeah, it's that dinner time conversation. It's having everybody sit down at the end of the night and, break bread, have that meal and talk about how was your day? What did you do to be kind to somebody today? Did you help somebody today? How was school? How are your studies? And really just connecting with my kids and my husband at the end of the day and understanding where they are. I think my family did a really good job of just meeting us where we were, no matter what was kind of going on in our own little universe, because my kids are just little people, and they have their own stuff going on. And so I love that my folks did that. And so my husband and I have definitely recreated that in our home for our own children.
So most band kids, I'm going to call you a band kid because you
Do
were
it.
kind of a band nerd in high school.
Yes.
I feel like are a little bit more structured and kind of have a plan about what they think they want to do after high school. So,
Mhm.
were you one of those kids that kind of had, here's what I'm going to do next, here's what I want to do for college, here's what I want to do after college? You kind of have all of that mapped out in high school?
Yeah, I mean, I went to high school here in Nashville, Tennessee, and in the 90s, Nashville was not very popular or fun. And so I wanted to get out of here just as quickly as possible. And so, applied to colleges really all over the United States, but I really loved the idea of breaking back north. And so I had some friends that had gone to Marquette University, such a great reputation, great basketball school. And one of the things I loved most was that they didn't have a music school because I knew I was never going to be a music major and I wanted to go to school for communications, but I loved that they had a thriving music program. And that was really important for me, especially from a social aspect and getting to be around people like me that loved band in high school, but knew they had no talent to actually do it for a living. And so it was a really great opportunity when I went to Marquette, toured the university, absolutely fell in love with the campus, loved that it was a very downtown. It felt a lot like Detroit, which is home. And that's, the place that I love. And so it just felt like a great fit. And I thought that when I got out of school, I wanted to do not-for-profit work. And it's just because of its Jesuit culture and kind of all the things, it felt like a really good fit.
So I had to Google where Marquette University was. So for those that aren't familiar, where is the university based?
It is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right downtown. So it is right in the middle of the city. It's about a 6-block radius that the school is located on. And it has everything from, traditional on-campus housing for freshmen and sophomores. Most junior seniors live off campus. There's apartments and things, but it is a very downtown metro experience.
So your degree was in communication.
Yes.
Why did you choose communication?
Because I couldn't pass accounting and get a business degree. No, I loved the College of Communication. It was amazing. Chris Farley had graduated from the College of Communication. I knew a lot of these amazing teachers. And I started taking business classes and communications classes, kind of not knowing which way I wanted to go. And then really also love the idea of doing not-for-profit work coming out of school. And so as I kind of started to look into that, I got a double major in women's studies, and a lot of those classes kind of went together, and so it was just a very interesting time. And I thought maybe, if I can't go in one direction, I'll go a journalism route or go, into media of some kind. Loved marketing. And so all of that really spoke to me around communications.
And then you wound up in procurement, which is
Hilarious. So
which is
graduated college, I know. And, if you live in southeastern Wisconsin, Quad Graphics is one of the biggest employers in the state of Wisconsin. And so I had interviewed with them, and they do this amazing training program where they take new, fresh grads and they move them all over the country. So somebody goes on maternity leave, you get a grad to cover their space. You fall on the ski slopes and break your leg, you get a trainee to cover their desk. And so it's this amazing program that's all around really print production. And you start in manufacturing, working on the line, you move through customer service and estimating and sales. So I was in that program and it was just really cool. And I loved the idea of moving. So I just moved all the time and did these crazy fun jobs. I wasn't scared of manufacturing. I'm from Detroit. Everybody in my family works in a plant. And so that part didn't scare me at all. And so it was really just interesting. I loved the idea of, raw goods, then turning into a finished product at the end of the manufacturing line.
So what did you think you were going to do after college? You wound up in procurement, but what was did you have a plan and you thought, I'm absolutely going to pursue this certain degree or this certain career?
I thought maybe I would eventually wind up in journalism, either working for a newspaper, working for a TV station. I think I'm a hoot. And so maybe an on-air personality. That's really where I thought I would wind up, and then the world happens and life takes you in other directions.
What would you say is the most important thing you learned in college, right? I feel like we grow and develop and we're on our own and we're learning so much about ourselves academically and personally. What's kind of the one thing that really stands out to you?
I think I learned resilience. I mean, when I left for college as, an 18-year-old kid, and I moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my parents said, we don't have enough money for you to come home whenever you want. We're going to see you at Christmas. And that was my first trip home, was in December. So I had saved a bunch of money and, always was a working person and, got to college, found myself a part-time job, did all the things that I needed to do. But I really had to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet in those first several months in order to just kind of make that transition from living at home, being with mom and dad, being with the siblings, to then going to college and really standing on my own 2 feet. And I was the first kid in my family to go to college. So I didn't have anybody to really shepherd me through that process. It was a lot of just quick learning.
So we've got Evan in the audience who said he worked in print to start his career. He knows Quad well. He also did work at an outdoor printing company there, and I'm probably going to butcher, Cuban Nicholson is where he worked. And he says Unicorn in New Jersey.
Cool.
We've also got Jane joining us from Chicago. We've got Zai who says Susan is the best in all caps.
He's great.
And we have some people dropping in notes about what's top of mind from Heather and Michael. So we'll make sure that we circle back to those as we continue our conversation. So I always ask guests to share some fun, random personal facts about themselves. And the one that blew my mind was that you moved 15 times in 5 years at Quad. I haven't even moved 15 times in my entire life. So that's just mind blown.
Yes.
So why, how, tell me about all of this.
So Quad has this training program, right, where they just pick people up and move them around the country. So what was interesting about Quad then was that they owned a home anywhere they had a manufacturing facility. So what they would do is they would take young people like myself. And when we won the National Geographic contract, when I was at Quad Graphics and they started in West Virginia, they bought 3 townhomes and they moved 10 kids to West Virginia and we all lived in the townhomes. And so what happened was I started in Wisconsin and worked in manufacturing and had an apartment there. And then very quickly, right after 9/11, they asked me if I'd take a role in Anaheim. And I was a little apprehensive about moving to California from the Midwest, kind of right at that time when air travel had kind of stopped and it was just a crazy time in the world. But I said, okay, I'll go, but I want my mom to come with me for the first 2 weeks. And they said, no problem. So my mother and I drove to Anaheim and she stayed with me for the first 2 weeks, then took a train to get home to Detroit. And it was awesome. And so I was in Anaheim for 6 months, then left and went to West Virginia. I moved 3 times to 3 different houses in and around West Virginia. And then, each time they wanted to move me, I just packed up my car and went to the next place. So after West Virginia, I went back to Wisconsin, worked in 2 different manufacturing facilities, 2 different houses there. Then they want to send me to San Francisco, which was fabulous. I was happy to go. Wound up in San Francisco for about 13 months, lived in 3 or 4 different places in and around San Fran. And I was there while Barry Bonds was trying to hit the, big home runs and
I
all the
come
things.
from a fanatic sports family, and
Yes.
Barry Bonds was very talked about quite a bit in the Scudder family. I think my
Yeah.
dad has never missed listening to or watching a Giants game in his entire life.
Amazing. So that was so fun to be there while that was going on. We'd stand in McCovey Cove and have a hot dog at lunch sometimes and see him, hitting, people be in the kayaks trying to get the balls. And then from there went to Chicago, lived a couple of different places in and around the Chicagoland area, and worked in the Wrigley building. And that was super fun and just a really neat area of Michigan Avenue. So I like to joke, I've got restaurant recommendations all over the United States if you ever need one.
So so it sounds like in this role you did so many different things. You kind of got exposure to all departments and working actually on a manufacturing line.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the most important thing you learned about procurement or supply chain with your time at Quad?
Yeah, absolutely. It was always interesting to see the job bag that we needed to execute on when I was in manufacturing and see the problems that the salespeople made. And it was always, I'll never forget in my whole life, the job that was the most messed up was a Nickelodeon job, actually. And it was that, that orange is so vibrant for Nickelodeon, and it's got to be their perfect Pantone orange. And it was a big huddle because the wrong orange was going to be used. And we didn't have the right ink wash ups and all the things. And I thought, when I get to sales, I'm not going to make these mistakes. And then, I go through a couple more rotations. I wind up in sales in Chicago. And then you realize working with clients how hard that is to get every little detail right, and all the versions of books and all just the things that have to happen behind the scenes. And so I think what I really learned was that details matter, and that you really have to understand your craft in order to be successful, whether you're the person working on the manufacturing line, doing the work, all the way through the sales process. And I remember, my territory was Iowa, and I would cold call dairy farmers to print their cheese catalogs. That is a hard sale to make. So I've been on the other side of the phone trying to call people to sell them a product that I thought they needed, and that's a tough road. So I think I learned a lot about details. I learned a lot about being gracious to salespeople that are cold calling you. So I always try to take those calls. I may not take them timely, but I try to take them and, understand what people are trying to bring to the table. Because everybody's got a job to do and everybody's trying to do their very best. And so understanding positive intent is also a big one.
I think one of the things that stands out about what you just said to me is you understand what it's like from a supplier and what it's like to be in their shoes. And in my experience, some of the best procurement leaders that I've worked with, I've always been on the go-to-market marketing or sales side throughout my career, is the ones who have actually been on the sales side happen to also be the best suppliers because that relationship, you understand what it's like, and you are going to communicate and have a way with suppliers that maybe someone who hasn't been in their shoes before has. So kudos to you. And I wish it was more a part of the procurement process, was having procurement people practice and live, the day in the life of a salesperson for a few weeks.
Yes, absolutely.
So you were at Quad for a few years. You moved all over the country.
Yes.
Why the pivot to Dollar General?
Yeah. So basically my husband and I were dating at the time. We were long distance. I was in Chicago. He was in Nashville. That's back when flights on Southwest were $39 each way. And so we would just zip back and forth. And then once things kind of started to get serious and we, got engaged, it was like somebody's moving. And I felt like, I was very flexible at that point. I have moved a lot. So moving to Nashville felt like, hey, I've lived here before. I can absolutely do this again. So I decided to relocate to Nashville, tried to get the Quadraccis to let me work from the Nashville office, but they didn't have one. I would have had to go to Louisville. So I just decided to do something different, but loved working Quad. Fabulous company. Their training program was amazing. And so when my husband and I got married, Dollar General was one exit away from our house, their headquarters.
Mhm.
And so I thought I should try to get a job at that big building because my commute would be great. And after commuting in Chicago for many years, that seemed pretty delightful.
And I guess this is at a time where remote wasn't even a thing.
No,
Like
0.
everybody was in office.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so had started kind of talking to some people in our neighborhood and just in the community about working at DG, and come to find out they had just started their very first print advertising programs. They had never done it before. And they had a local broker who I just knew in the community just because I knew him. And one thing led to another. And I applied for a job at DG and got hired. So I went from selling print to buying print. So I worked in the marketing department as basically a buyer for marketing, and started with the print circular program, and then eventually moved into all the in-store signage, in-store graphics, and kind of everything else that marketing needed.
So I come from the marketing procurement world. I actually also started my career in print and packaging. So pretty cool that you and Evan and I have that in common. What would you say was the most difficult category to source, and why, when you were at Dollar General? Because not a lot of people have actually worked in marketing procurement before.
Yes.
And I think it can be a little more tricky and harder than people think.
Oh, for sure. For us, I think the hardest part was always the kit packing. It was how to put things together in an easy way for our frontline associates to get a package of something, whether it be shelf liners or shelf strips or whatever it was, to be able to execute what we were asking them. Because as the marketing gets more complex, so does the signage, and that point of sale is really tricky. And so I think when you're dealing with those frontline associates who you want caring for the customer, not having to fuss with perfing things out and punching stuff out, it was always this balance of what can we produce and manufacture that's going to meet our needs and tell the story we need to tell at the shelf, but then also be easy enough to execute the way that we want it done appropriately. And that's always a very fine balance.
What would you say was the most important thing you learned about procurement in this new role?
I had no idea the volume of stuff that you needed in retail. Like, that sounds so goofy, but it was very apparent to me once I started that role, just how much went into everything. Because you don't think about it. You have a product you want to sell. You have this lip balm. Somebody's got to make the label, and it's going to go on the lip balm, which then goes in a package that goes to the distribution center. And again, I like to learn by understanding every aspect of the process. So the first thing I did was go to our distribution centers. How does this stuff come in? What do the pallets look like? How does the stores get them? Okay, now I'm going to go to a store. Let's bring them in off the truck. How does it work? How do we get on the shelf? Well, how does this work? And so I think I was able to be effective and learn quickly because I was willing to really immerse myself in all aspects of kind of what we were trying to do and the story we were trying to tell the customer.
When did you know throughout your career, and maybe it was at Dollar General, maybe it was later on, that you wanted to be a leader? Like, when did you say, I'm ready to move up? I want to manage people. I don't want to be an individual contributor anymore.
Yeah, I think it was at DG, and it was really the graphic artists, because I knew that I couldn't do my job effectively unless they had the support that they needed to get their jobs done effectively. And as we worked with each other longer, I realized I started to lead before I was ever their boss. Like, before it was like on a piece of paper and there was a title and all that stuff. It was more like us working together, understanding what their challenges were, and then influencing without authority to some peers to say, hey, we are not going to meet our deadlines unless you get us these 3 product samples yesterday. Those kinds of things. And building the relationships with the right people in the organization to just help folks get their job done. And then the promotion started coming and the titles and all of those things. But it was around, I couldn't be effective in my job and help my peers be effective. We needed some push.
We have Dr. Cindy Burkett says Susan was a born leader.
Cindy's so nice.
So what would you say? So you said you were leading by influence. So before you actually had the promotion on paper, what would you say stands out as something that you did that was really impactful that helped you get that first promotion for those that are listening who are maybe want to be first time leaders or those that are looking to advance and manage larger teams at some point in their careers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those that truly understand a problem and can solve through the problem are those that begin to emerge as leaders. And so if you see a problem in something that you're even just working on, but you know there's two or three other folks that are impacted by that or could potentially help, you can very quickly establish yourself as a leader by reaching across boundaries and talking to other folks and not being afraid to have a difficult conversation potentially about roadblocks you're having in a project or roadblocks you're just having in general. And I think that's how I see people start to be successful in leadership, is just by not being afraid to manage a project or manage a process, not even about the people. The people will come eventually. And so that's always what I encourage folks is you've got to have a hunger for the problem and to be able to solve it.
Biggest impact you made at your time at Dollar General? Of all the things you did, what's like the one that, wow, this was a really, really big thing that I did or my team and I did?
I wasn't afraid to work on really complex projects. I mean, I did the first contract we ever did for the biggest newspaper insertion program, stuff like that, where it was kind of unknown territory for some of us at the time because we just never done it. And I think it's the not being afraid to try something new. I worked with the legal team on their procurement needs. I worked with HR. You know, we had never done some of the big RFPs and looked at some of the bigger software programs because at DG, we were just growing so fast. It was so big, so fast. And I think I was not afraid to hit the pause button sometimes and get way in the weeds with the people that were doing the work, but then also able to be strategic to figure out like what we really needed in order to help us be successful while we were having extreme growth.
You were there a few years.
Yeah.
And then you, 10 years long. That's for me. I'm born and raised in Silicon Valley. That's a long time.
It's forever
to be at one company.
Yes.
Why, after 10 years, did you decide to leave and join the Brookdale team?
Yeah, I loved Dollar General. It's a fabulous place to work, really fun culture, you know, and it's all the same people still there today. They're fabulous. I see them all the time. But for me, I had done the categories that I was going to be able to do. And I think I personally was ready for a new challenge. I loved retail. It was fast paced. You know, it was really exciting. But if you're in Nashville and you're looking for a new job, you're going to go to work in healthcare. And so I just kind of started to very quietly dip a toe in the water and see what was out there. And a friend knew a friend who knew someone that was hiring at Brookdale. And they looked at my resume and they said, "Hey, will you come over and interview?" And I wasn't even really considering it at the time and went to interview. And it was just a really great process to go through. And they wanted me to come in as a director to do all the purchasing for the medical teams. And I thought, well, this is hilarious. It's the one thing I've never bought in my life. And I said that in the interview with the CAO. It's like, I don't think you want to hire me. I have no idea what we're doing here, you know, but it's the same principles. It's the same processes. It's just different vendors in different categories. And the thing I loved about healthcare was I didn't need to be a nurse. If I needed a nurse, I could throw a rock and find one. They were all over the building, or if we needed a doctor, right? Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't as scary as I thought. And so I made the move to healthcare.
So before we pivot into this next role in your time in healthcare, we have a couple of questions that came in from the audience that relate to manufacturing. So I want to make sure I ask you those. So Sandre asks, what are the top 5 things to implement when setting up a new manufacturing facility from a supply chain standpoint? So I'm guessing he is somehow working in manufacturing, and this may be something that he's tackling himself.
Mm-hmm. You know, something we always were talking about at Quad and at DG, frankly, were, you know, conveyored or non-conveyored systems and kind of thinking through the machinability and kind of, you have to understand what your product is and what you're trying to get in and out of both the import centers and a manufacturing facility, depending on where your raw goods are coming for. So I think the most important thing you can do is just stop and plan. What is it? Measure twice, cut once, all day long. And then also having great data management and like understanding how you're going to do if there's picking involved or, however you're going to get your products out of the distribution center, knowing like what your plan is there based on your labor strategy. So depending on where you're going and your human capital, that may influence more of the design than you may anticipate. So I think those are probably, I don't know that I can give 5 things, but those were 2.
And I'll throw one into the mix. So I've spent the last 3 years of my career in the manufacturing space, and I would say that there are typically lots of purchase orders and lots of PO lines issued. We're talking about thousands and thousands. Yeah. And if you don't have a way to manage the post PO process, you will have a nightmare on your hands where you're getting parts and materials late or incomplete orders, which will impact your production schedule and will ultimately impact your revenue and impact your reputation within the market. So figure out a process and a way to manage the post PO. So after you issue the purchase orders, all the changes and things that happen in a manufacturing plant. I don't think a lot of people think about that, but it can have a huge, huge impact on your production.
For sure.
So we have the hubby on the line.
I see that.
Who Susan always said we didn't date in high school. One day I'll have to convince her that we did. So we'll have to have a debate on another show.
Indeed.
All right. So you pivoted from manufacturing into healthcare. So kind of a big shift and change. Huge. What were you hired to do in this new role? Like, what was the real value that you were being hired to add to Brookdale?
Yeah, I think they liked the idea of somebody that had the retail rigor and the fast-paced, background from both retail and manufacturing to come in and really give a fresh set of eyes to the healthcare purchasing. So managing the major distribution, of all the medical supplies, medical waste, medical gas, anything needed to care for the patient was really why I was brought in.
And looking back on your time there, what do you think is the biggest impact that you had of all the things that you worked on and did? Like you could say, I am so proud, or this is how I or my teams added tremendous value.
Yeah, I started like a vendor program there, meaning that I don't think we had looked at Brookdale our partner relationships maybe as thoroughly as I had in some other organizations that I worked in. And so I brought the rigor from retail around like vendor days and, QBR management and kind of how we looked at some of those things, maybe a little bit differently, specifically to the medical vendors. And then also a lot of rigor around data management and what the meaningful metrics are from a healthcare perspective, cost per patient per day, all of those things that we talk about, and making sure that we were benchmarking our vendors appropriately across all categories to define good and then hold our vendors accountable to what good was.
So being that I've spent the last 3 years of my career in manufacturing, I would argue that data is one of the top 3 biggest issues with any manufacturer that I've worked with. They don't trust the data in their ERP. They don't trust the data in their MRP. And then they're doing material and supply planning based off bad data. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a crapshoot. And then you're impacting cash flow because you're ordering too much or you're ordering too little. From a data perspective, what do you think actually works in keeping your data clean?
You have to have governance around your data management. I think you just have to be really intentional about making the data a priority, because we are all data rich and insight stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, most people are, right? We've got data for days and we don't even know what to do with it. We don't know if it's even correct. And what's even an added complexity in healthcare is we have medical record data.
Yeah.
So now you want to take all your purchasing data and your financial data and marry it to the medical record data, and you should be able to get insights there. And then your vendors have data too. And so what we try to do at Brookdale, and I've even brought some of that rigor here to WellPath, is really understanding what are meaningful metrics, and then how do we make sure we have the right data elements in the background to support those meaningful metrics. And you got to maintain the data. So once you fix it the first time and you get it right and you feel like you're in a good spot, you have to be married to keeping it appropriate.
And I would argue a big component of all of this is making people trust the data.
For sure.
Because there's such people have had such bad experiences where they don't believe the data. So they're working off their own spreadsheets or their own systems, and you coming in and setting this governance, and you can say the data's good or the data's clean, but getting the team to believe it is another story.
Yeah, and that's not easy. That's hard.
So what would you say is the most important lesson you learned while working at Brookdale, doing all these new things, learning a new industry, kind of building out a career for yourself in the medical space?
Reimbursements are weird. It was very interesting to go from manufacturing and retail, which is pretty straightforward. It's a cash transaction. A customer comes in with money, they pay for something, they leave, right? You know, when I was at Brookdale, it was everything from independent living to senior living to assisted living to home health to hospice care. And those hospice nurses were angels. And I would just bend over backwards twice to do anything that they needed because they were helping a family transition a loved one. And so what I learned was clinicians are called to be clinicians, and it is a calling, and you want to support them any way that you can. And I found just such meaning in the work from a healthcare perspective. And Brookdale just does some really amazing things with seniors and, you know, their wishes. They do, you know, grant wishes for people that have bucket list items that they've never gotten to do. And we had just amazing vendor partnerships. It was just a really great place to cut my teeth. And that clinical team was phenomenal, just amazing and very open to teaching and helping.
And I'm sure they greatly appreciated support from procurement. You bending over backwards and showing them appreciation was probably not something they were used to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's all on the approach, right? And again, the first thing I did when I started at Brookdale was go spend a week in a skilled nursing building. You know, what does it look like to pass meds in skilled nursing? How does it work? Talk to me about this med cart. Why do the wheels not work? What's happening with these punch cards for the drugs? You know, all the things. And I think because I've been a kind of person that's always been willing to just like get into the nitty gritty, you know, the operators really respect that. If you can just kind of throw in with them and really try to solve their actual problems.
So when I was prepping for our interview, the thing that really stood out to me about your career was this promotion that you received to a senior director role when you were at Brookdale. And I feel like one of the things I want to make sure we get into is how you've been able to catapult your career and move up so quickly. What changed for you when you were promoted to a senior director?
Yeah, it was span of control for sure. And so I inherited a bunch of more categories. So we had done some kind of reshuffling and, you know, some folks had kind of moved on. And so because we had had some turnover, it was an interesting time. And so I picked up a couple categories that no one else wanted. Trash. Let's just say it, trash. No one wants to manage waste. It is not a fun category to manage, but it is bulky and it's expensive.
When you say bulky, meaning it's a big spend.
It's a big spend and it's a big item. So it's a big pain to move it around because we had a lot of trash. And so, yeah, our spend was quite large. I also picked up, you know, some of the maintenance categories like elevator maintenance, things like that, and the folks that supported those things. And so my book of business really grew when I got the promotion to senior director, as well as the number of folks that were on my team. And so it was all new categories, again, to learn and to understand how they worked in our buildings, and then working with the operators and clinicians to really make sure they had the support needed. Because when you're running a senior living facility, your garbage doesn't get picked up. That's bad, right?
And it smells nasty. I mean, ugh, gross.
Right. And we had buildings in major metro, like we had one in downtown DC, and those aren't easy places to get in. So, Waste Management wanted to change our truck size. I'm like, you can't, that won't back up to our dock door, And so it's those kinds of details that I think were very interesting that I certainly had never been close to, that really brought some of the issues that come with those kinds of categories to the forefront.
Well, and that ties back to, you said one of the things you learned at Quad when you were starting your career is the importance of attention to detail.
Yes.
And it sounds like that has really helped you throughout your career as you've taken on more responsibility and managed more categories.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So you are currently now at a company called WellPath. So why the transition? Why did you decide to leave Brookdale?
Yeah, I got a call from a recruiter. It was the funniest thing. And she said, hey, there's a company in town. They're going through a name change. You've probably never heard of them. They're going to start a procurement team. Do you think you would be interested in interviewing? And it used to be called CCS then. And I said, I don't understand, who is WellPath? And she says, it's the old CCS. I said, oh, okay, I know who that is. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I've never started my own team. I've always gone to work in teams. And that just seemed like a very interesting opportunity to kind of be employee number one and start something from the ground floor. So again, love my team at Brookdale, see them at all the local shows. We're in industry things together all the time. They're fabulous, but really loved the idea of kind of getting to start something from the ground floor and kind of make it my own.
That seems scary and overwhelming for a lot of people. I relate. I've spent my career working in startups. So I'm definitely a builder as well. I like coming in with nothing and being able to create. How did you know where to start when you have nothing? There's so much to do. What did you say, wow, I really need to focus on this for my first 6 months or my first year?
I mean, I first just reached out to contacts I knew in the industry. I'd had a fabulous boss along the way, Angeline Edsinger. She had done some work with A.T. Kearney, and then she was with me at Dollar General. And I started with Angeline, and I said, I think I might go do this. What do you think? I need some help, And so she kind of gave me the pep talk that I needed to feel like I could do it. And I knew what needed to be done in order to be successful, just based on the makeup and models of the teams that I'd been on, right? And I knew some of the tips and tricks of the trade to come in and kind of make a splash quickly. And I knew if I could come in and save a little money and fix a couple contracts quick and make a believer out of a key couple stakeholders, that it would speak for volumes, right? I would definitely just start winning people over. And it really worked. I just came in and started doing some of the easy things in an organization that had not had a formalized supply chain program. And I really was able to come in and do those things very quickly. And then I looked like a superhero. I used to joke, I'm going to wear a cape around here all day because I'm that cool. And so it was really exciting for me, very exciting to be able to just help the teams and find the quick wins from a savings perspective, or help renegotiate contracts that maybe weren't what we wanted them to be.
So as you were proving your worth and proving the value that procurement can provide, right? You're kind of a startup within a well-funded organization.
Yes.
How did you get budget to hire and build out a team? That's a very, very challenging thing to do, to convince the CFO or the C-suite that I want budget to hire these, team leaders to build out and do more.
Yeah. When they hired me, I said, I'll save 10x my salary in the first year. And I did it. So I said, now you let me hire somebody else, they'll save 10x. And when you go from nothing to something, you can do that. Okay. When you go from something to something else, you can't typically. But we were going from nothing to something. And so it absolutely worked. The other thing that happened, though, was we found the shadow procurement in the organization that already existed. And I just started turning and pulling people and saying, oh, you're in this team. You really should be in my team. Let's talk about that. And so then it was the ability to collapse some of the other orgs into what made sense to live in. I'm in finance. So to live in the finance team under my procurement group.
So what does your team look like now? How do you have it structured?
Yeah. So today I have both procurement, accounts payable, I manage our travel and fleet program and our real estate. So that's kind of all under my umbrella. So if you think about it, it's basically AP and procurement, two separate teams that both report to me. And then in procurement specifically, we have 3 buyers, 2 specialists, a supervisor, a manager, and a director. So, and then we have categories that are split by each of the different folks. So everybody has some categories that they're responsible for, as well as catalog management, which is basically like SKU management in healthcare for formularies. And that's kind of how we try to divide and conquer.
Where does technology fit into your plan and strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing. So technology, I think for us so far has really been focused on the AP space and making sure that we have really good processes and procedures around invoice management, timely approvals, and kind of all of those things. From a procurement perspective, we've not done a great deal with technology because we have some tools in place. And so I think really the pandemic messed me up. Right. Because I was here for 2 years. I had all these big plans of what we were going to do in years 3, 4, and 5. And then COVID happened, Sarah, and we just had to stop everything and we had to take care of people. And so I feel like right now we're kind of getting back on track to say, okay, what are the procurement tools that we need? And so we're doing all the things. We're going to conferences. We're talking to vendors. We're understanding what they're bringing. And the tech's changing so fast. And so understanding kind of what's in the market and what's the problem we're solving for that a solution might be able to fix. Because technology is not a solution. Matthew Schultz always says that. Technology is not the answer. It's just going to help you get to an answer. And so I think we've got to more clearly define the problem, which I think a lot of folks are in the same boat right now.
What about AI, right? There's so much talk around AI in procurement, and it's going to replace a lot of the entry-level jobs. You've got people who love AI. You've got people who hate AI. Like, where do you see that fitting into your IT strategy over the next couple of years? Is it even something that is a priority for you right now?
You know, I think it's a little bit different for healthcare. And it's interesting when people kind of go down this road because when we get a non-formulary order in a healthcare environment, right? So that means somebody's ordering something that's off catalog. It's because a doctor wrote a prescription for it. It's not because they felt like buying it. And so somebody's got to get on the phone with that doc and say, why did you write a prescription for XYZ when ABC is the thing that we normally buy? And that might be a completely legitimate thing. They may say, hey, look, we've already tried ABC. We tried it 2 different times. We did it 2 times and it still didn't work. This patient's got to have XYZ. That's the next thing. And then we're going to buy it. And so I think some things certainly are going to be impacted by AI. I think those routine, mundane tasks, things that are repetitive in nature, where you just have to click buttons because the buttons have to be clicked, for sure. But I do think there's an aspect in healthcare of patient care that we're always going to have people talking to clinicians about the care because there's no magic checklist that's going to exist that's going to take care of an individual patient.
So it's making me think of, I saw a post this week about an AI company that's created the AI interviewer.
Oh.
So it's an AI agent that is handling some of the interview process for companies.
Interesting.
Which I think you mentioned the whole people component. And I think HR is something that it's going to be interesting to watch how AI impacts it. I feel like if I was interviewing and I hopped on and it was an AI agent or an AI bot, I would feel a little freaked out and I would feel a little weird.
Yes.
But is that something where you think that's a people process or a people role that is going to be supplemented, at least the initial screening part, by AI? So I'm just curious to see how things like that are impacted and how that impacts your space.
Yeah, it's not much different than video interviewing today, right? When they want you to make a video and submit it. We've looked at some of those kinds of technologies throughout my career, and it's a similar idea. It'll be interesting.
So what keeps you up at night this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are just moving so fast from a technology perspective. So it's like making smart choices from a tech perspective, but it's patient care. We're still seeing the ramifications of COVID. There are shortages. There are human capital shortages at our vendors where maybe they can't meet the production that we need because they don't have somebody to pack a box and ship a box, or they're struggling with raw materials because of some of the things just happening in the world around us. So it doesn't feel like we're quite on the other side of, the pandemic. There are definitely still ramifications. Also inflation. I mean, it's real. Zai's on here. He talks about cash burn all the time. I think just the economy in general and what's kind of going on in the United States, it's fascinating from just a business perspective.
Oh, just go to the grocery store, go get gas.
Girl, yes, it's crazy. I mean, my children wanted Gatorade, right? And I don't typically go to the grocery store. My husband does because we save money that way. And, I was buying the Gatorade, having a stroke at the price. And so it is just interesting to think about now that the CARES Act money is gone, and American healthcare companies are trying to figure it out. What does this new world look like? I think it's going to be a very interesting and colorful 12 to 24 months.
So, Susan, we are at what is called the Spitfire round. It's how I close out all of our interviews. I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
And you're going to respond with the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
Okay, let's do it.
Accomplishment you are most proud of.
Being a mom.
Quality you admire most in yourself.
Authenticity.
What's your dream?
To win the Powerball.
Biggest pet peeve?
People that are late.
Favorite thing to do in your downtime?
Scrapbook.
And bucket list item you plan to check off your list this year?
Another cruise. That's not a bucket list item, but it's something fabulous.
All right. I want to thank everyone who was able to join us live today. If you are not yet connected with Susan, I highly, highly recommend reaching out and connecting with her on LinkedIn. Our next show will take place on May 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, I will be interviewing another leader in the space, having them share their personal journey and story. And with that, Susan, it was absolutely lovely to see you today, and I hope I am able to spend time with you at a conference again this year.
Back at you, friend. It was great to be with you, and thank you again. This was fabulous.